The January 10th, 2022 Twilton City Council work session. Happy New Year to all, and thanks for joining us tonight. We have a couple of very interesting discussions tonight. First being consideration of electric scooter operations. I'm told this is from staff and representatives from the scooter company.
Yeah, we will start with Nick Westendorf, our Deputy Public Works Director, and he will introduce the item and be able to answer questions, as well as our bird representative.
Okay. Welcome, Nick.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Good to see y'all. Happy 2022. Crazy. So we are here this evening to discuss consideration of electric scooter operations. As Charlene mentioned, I'll be joined with a bird representative, Michael Cavato, who has a brief presentation in a few minutes, and then will be available for Q&A with me. But first, I wanted to touch a little bit on the process to get to this point. So 2021, time flies, 2021, Bird reached out to the city and inquired about bringing electric scooters to Twilton. And so public works staff worked with Michael and his colleagues at Bird to gather some information around what they typically do, what that looks like, just get some basic understanding of how the operations could work. And then convened a group of staff of various departments to bounce ideas off of and hear consideration of electric scooters and hear concerns that staff have and try to get a path forward charted, as well as speaking with a couple other cities in Oregon that are similar size to Twilton where Bird has deployed. And through that process found that typically it's gone fairly smoothly for smaller cities. Bird has been pretty flexible and responsive, and they were very helpful in the fact gathering and getting us to this portion. And so it was determined that we wanted to bring it all to you all for consideration. We heard some interest in having the discussion further. And so we've gotten to the point now this evening where we're looking for direction on how to proceed if it's something council is interested in. And so part of that process is to have Bird available to address some of the popular questions staff had, as well as some I think council may have, and then open it up from there for Q&A. Michael and I will both field those depending on the nature. And then I hope at the end, you all can provide staff some guidance on what to do next. And with that, I'll see if Michael is available and ready to take it from here. Good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you, Nick. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thanks very much for having me. As Nick mentioned, I do have a short presentation I can run through before we jump into Q&A. Is everyone able to see my screen?
It is not full screen, but we can see it.
Perfect. There we go.
Now it's full screen.
Hey, we got there. For those unfamiliar with Bird, we are a shared electric mobility company. We're now present in over 350 cities globally, making us the largest shared mobility provider in the world. Effectively, what our services do is provide a public transportation option. We specialize in what they call micromobility, meaning those modalities of transportation that are ideally suited for the trips that are sub 5 miles, which is about 60% of trips within the United States. What you see there, our overarching mission: improve quality of life within cities, help reduce some of the traffic congestion that many communities experience, improve air quality, and generally make things a little bit more livable. The way that our system works is very similar to some of the bike share systems you might already be familiar with. Given the proximity to Portland, I'm guessing at least some individuals here this evening have probably had some firsthand experience. Individuals will download a mobile application onto their smartphone. They'll undergo a safety tutorial where they're taught proper parking etiquette, as well as safe riding behavior when they create an account. They then see one of the units either throughout the community itself or via the map functionality on the mobile application, scan it to unlock, take it where they need to go, which is usually somewhere around 10 minutes away, before hitting a button on their phone to end their ride. Somebody else will come along and do the exact same thing. So it's multiple short trips per day per unit. Really looking to solve what they call that first last mile problem, which I think we can get into a little bit more detail in a minute here. For those who have not seen some of the units in the past, we do have a number of different models. What I'm showing here is our Bird Zero model. It is the one that I think is most likely to be present within Twilton. However, there could be some differentiation within the aesthetic depending on the model that is most available. Regardless, the functionality is very similar between all the different scooters. There are a few things I do want to draw your attention to here. First and foremost, every single one of our scooters is equipped with a front light. Tail lights, brake lights, running lights that are all visible up to 500 feet away at night, as well as a safety decal that provides some reminders around the safe riding behavior that I was mentioning earlier, and contact information for all riders and non-riders to be able to get a hold of us at all times. Every single one of our scooters is also equipped with what's known as an IoT device, basically a combination of cellular phone and GPS that allows us to control where the scooters can and cannot go, at what speed they travel at, and track the location at all times. I do want to be very clear when I say this, we're not looking for any investment or any subsidy from the city of Tualatin for implementing this system. This is something where Bird will be covering all the upfront costs as well as the ongoing expenditure for allowing us to be operational within the community. What we have found to be particularly effective, and I'm hoping that this presentation here is indicative of that, is to make sure that we do build strong foundations with the communities that we want to partner with, as well as have an ongoing resource, an individual that we call a relationship manager that all city staff and council will be able to reach out to at any time if there's any dynamic adjustments that need to be made to our services, or if there's just any questions that happen to need fielding. What that means, to draw an example here, if you have a special event such as a farmer's market or a street festival that requires special geofencing parameters, it takes us about 15 to 20 minutes to update those parameters. We can simply block out the area so that nobody is interfering with that particular event through the connection with the relationship manager, who can always act as an open line of communication. What we've found to be particularly effective from an operational standpoint with communities similar to Tualatin is by partnering with local members of the community to handle some of the day-to-day operations, meaning the deployment, the rebalancing, which is a fancy word for moving the devices around from places where people have ended their ride, and the recharging of the scooters. We call these individuals fleet managers. This is a full-time business. What it means is that we can engage with the community and have somebody locally based that the city can confidently turn to if there's ever anything that needs to be addressed, such as a scooter parked in an inappropriate location very rapidly. It also allows us to operate on a revenue share basis with these individuals, meaning that the majority of the net revenue that's actually generated stays within the Tualatin community. Specifically within Tualatin itself, there are a number of distinct advantages that I think the community has in comparison to some of the other municipalities that we've partnered with in the past. First and foremost, the bike lane network is significantly more robust than I think you would find in almost any other United States location. You have the benefit of being a very self-contained environment through the river bordering on the north, and the fact that most of the neighboring communities tend to be a little bit more residential, so the jurisdictional boundaries tend to be offer a geographic range that the scooters would be well suited to. These can improve the connectivity between the south side of Tualatin and that commercial area that you're seeing within the north, which I think is something that, at least according to city staff, is definitely something that's been top of mind. I mentioned first last mile with the West Station located on the north side. This is certainly something that I think could be utilized by individuals to get to and from there, particularly given the very high commuter population. Finally, with traffic congestion being an issue, I think in just about every community in the United States, and one that was mentioned to me specifically within Tualatin, I think this is a way that we could very effectively, with this small fleet, remove some of the cars that are creating some of that and offer alternatives for people to get around. How this can impact the community is overwhelmingly positive according to the data that's been gathered. Almost 60% of our trips end in front of a small business. The average take home for our fleet manager is a little over $70,000 a year. So it certainly can be a very lucrative proposition for individuals. When you consider that there is no other shared mobility network within Tualatin, and that this average is taken from the national average, which includes locations that are very saturated, places like Portland, certainly I think it can be even greater. Finally, Emory University released a study earlier in, no, sorry, that was in 2021, not used to saying 2022 yet. So Emory University released a study last year, which showed that every single individual e-scooter over a 6-month period contributed to $921 in additional spending within local businesses, specifically within the food and beverage industry. They've actually since revised that number up to about $1,100 per e-scooter, but haven't settled on the final figure yet. What this means is this is an excellent way to help stimulate the local economy, drive traffic to some of those commercial areas, some of those small businesses that might have experienced a little bit of a shift as a result of some of the restrictions with COVID and the like. Because we were the first company in the world to offer shared electric scooters, it does mean that our technology tends to be the most robust. I've mentioned some of our geofencing and geospeed controls. This means that we can keep people off of some of the trails, for example, that might be inappropriate to have the scooters on, or out of areas where they're simply not going to present a safe environment. We can also control the speed at which the scooters go. So during special events, for example, we can reduce the maximum speed so that they aren't zipping around at a place or creating a scenario where they might just create a bit of a nuisance. We were the first company in the industry to also offer a feature that we call helmet selfies. So if an individual will photograph themselves at the end of their ride using their phone, wearing a helmet, they actually receive a credit to their next ride. It's one of the ways that we incentivize safe riding behavior. This is done in combination with a ongoing free helmet giveaway throughout the entirety of the United States. Individuals can have a very cute bird branded helmet shipped directly to their door for $9.95 shipping and handling, no additional fees. With our parking management tools, we can control where the scooters can end their ride. So again, if you have a particular corridor where it would be inappropriate to have the scooters going directly from point A to point B, we can incentivize or encourage our riders to take the scooters to a particular location before the ride ends. We also offer a number of features for new users on some of our make models of scooters. Warm-up mode reduces the maximum speed of the unit from 15 miles per hour, which is about what your average amateur bicyclist travels at, down to 6 miles per hour for a new rider, before gradually increasing up to that maximum amount, just to allow people to get a little bit more familiarity with the system and a little bit more confidence on the units. Because a large number of our riders are actually regular commuters, we implemented Quick Start. This allows them to simply activate a feature within their account, approach a scooter, it will know that they automatically want to unlock it, take it where they need to go, and simply walk away, and the system will automatically lock it for them based on their commuting patterns. I think it's very important to make sure that I leave a lot of questions or time here for a Q&A session, as Nick mentioned. So I would be more than happy to address any of the questions from the council or city staff as appropriate here, if there are any.
Thanks, Michael. That was a pretty impressive presentation. That was very thorough. So I'll open the floor to questions for Nick and Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Pratt, then Councilor Sacco.
Sorry, I'm on a meeting. Hi, Michael. I really like the idea. This is a first last mile thing, but I have some questions. And my first one was safety, and you addressed the helmet issue. But in downtown Portland, when they first had these, and I worked down there, people didn't know. My understanding is they follow the bike road rules, but there were people on the roads, there were people on the bike, and there were people on the sidewalks, and it was really kind of a confusing big mess. So I'm wondering what kind of safety training you give people on these.
Great question. So we can create localized safety training within any of the onboarding materials that new users create. We can also make sure that anybody who comes into Twilton from a different location receives a notification on their phone telling them of any kind of local rules and regulations. 99% of state law boils down to treat it like you would a bicycle. Keep it to the right side of roads, keep it in bike lanes where appropriate, keep them off of sidewalks. What I would say is because we have the benefit of starting with a new foundation using all the experiences of the past, you're unlikely to see the same kind of initial experience within Twilton, simply because we can take a lot of what we learned previously, implement it here. Simultaneously, we're talking about a much, much smaller fleet within Twilton in comparison to Portland, which allows us to mitigate quite a bit of that risk.
And that leads to my next question, which is you have people that will pick these up, move them around. I'm assuming you'll work with the city and look at use to determine, like you mentioned the West Station, I would think probably the Mohawk bus station, but how often like if I took one home from the West Station to my house, how long would it take till it got picked up out of my neighborhood?
Very good question. So these scooters are being checked in on multiple times per day. It likely would not be a 24/7 operation, simply because it would be a little bit challenging to have somebody awake at, for example, 3 a.m. But assuming between the hours of maybe 7 a.m. to about 9 p.m., somebody is checking on every single active unit that is available out there and prioritizing the ones that haven't been touched early the next morning. In addition to that, you mentioned city input in terms of where these should be positioned. Absolutely. We want to make sure that there is a ton of collaboration between ourselves and city staff in terms of positioning. Further, we have a very sophisticated machine learning algorithm, so it'll actually be able to predict where the scooter should be placed based off of a whole bunch of both static and dynamic factors. The longer we are active within a community, the more accurate it becomes. So within a few weeks, we will really hone in on the best places to put these to deliver the most benefit to the community. Moreover, we'll provide the city with real-time data dashboards, so they'll be able to monitor every single scooter that is actually active within Twilton, historic ride data, start endpoints, etc. So you'll have complete visibility on that as well.
Then my last two questions have to do with money. The first is, I'm assuming these things, what do they go they probably top out at 12 miles an hour in gasoline, or
15 miles per hour is what we.
15. Okay, so I'm just wondering, you pay $1 and then instead of per minute fee, what is that typically in just ballpark? No, you can't.
It ranges depending on different city criteria. I would say you're looking at usually between 39 to 42 cents a minute. So within the area,
Okay,
you're looking at between maybe $5 to $6 to get directly from point A to point B.
okay. And then my last question with this is that this will take city staff time and effort. So is there an opportunity for revenue sharing for the city on this?
That's an excellent question. I'm more than happy to talk about some sort of licensing fee so that we can cover some of the costs that city staff have put into this initiative. Certainly, I think it's something that we can work together to make sure that it allows for longevity within the service so that we can be here 5, 10, 15 years from now. We can always review it over the years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, council member.
Councilor Saka.
Thank you. My question has to do with reliability and what sort of, I wouldn't want to call it like a fail rate, but my personal experience, I've tried to use these scooters once in Seattle, and not your brand. And there was 4 of us and we couldn't get all 4 scooters to work at once. And so what does that reliability rate look like? And what can people do to make sure that it's reliable, especially if we're talking about that first and last mile and they're relying on these scooters for transportation to and from work?
Excellent question. Colloquially, within our industry, they have something that they call the Peskin Ratio, which is the number of times you try to use one of these versus the number of times that you actually are able to successfully activate a ride. There needs to be a certain balance within that ratio in order for users to continuously come back. Because we don't have the luxury of having tens of thousands of units within Twilton and tens of millions of individuals coming to them, it means that we have to reliably drill down on that if we want to have some long-term success. I would like for us to be in Twilton working, as I mentioned to Councilmember Pratt, 5, 10, 25 years from now with whatever modality happens to be in vogue at that point in time. So certainly it means that because of that set of circumstances, we do have to deliver something very reliable. We were the first company in the world to offer shared electric scooters and are now present in more cities than anything else. That means that our technology has really had the advantage to hone in on some of the common issues that I think some of the other companies might have experienced. Don't believe in necessarily speaking ill of our competitors, but I do know that we have an extremely reliable system with one of the highest app ratings out there. I'm not sure if that answered your question. If not, I'm more than happy to provide a little bit more detail.
I guess I'm kind of wondering more specifically, like, is there some sort of like fail rate to kind of determine, if, like, how reliable is this for somebody that is going to rely on it for commuting to and from work? Would you say 95%? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot with a specific statistic, but just so in my mind, I can categorize that reliability.
Excellent question. So that's where that machine learning algorithm that I mentioned earlier will actually come into play. So based off of where people are opening up the app, taking a look for scooters, based off of the historic trip data, where people are typically ending their ride, typically starting their rides with a little bit of a radius around them, we'll be able to predict with more and more accuracy where people typically need these at any given day, at any particular point in the day. What that means is, based off of the data that we have now, we'll do a good job of putting things out initially. But if you give us a couple of weeks, we'll hone in with all of the heat mapping specific to Twilton to be able to position these scooters in the best possible way so that they are most likely to get a ride. Moreover, for Twilton to be able to have the visibility on that, that's where those data dashboards that I was mentioning, you'll be able to see yourself how many regular commuters are using these within the metrics that we provide.
Michael, if I could jump in, I think I remember something from our earlier conversations that may help with this as well. I think you had mentioned during the rebalancing, when those scooters are picked up and charged and deployed, there's safety and functionality inspections that go on before they're put back on the street. Is that correct? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I think that would lend itself towards reliability as well.
Absolutely. So every single scooter, when it is checked in on, goes through a very standardized health check. So check certain things. When it gets brought back into whatever the service area is, it goes under a more rigorous inspection to make sure that there isn't anything damaged, there's any repairs that need to be done. Further, all of our users and all of our non-users can report issues with a scooter either using our 24/7 telephone number, email address, or community mode. If you download our mobile application and never want to be a rider, you can still scan and report issues with scooters, such as a mechanical defect that you've observed or something improperly parked. Our local fleet manager will go out there and help move it or take care of the situation as necessary. So as Nick mentioned, health check every time somebody is taking a look at one of these scooters or checking in on one, more rigorously done when they're brought into the service center for a deeper inspection. Excuse me.
Councilor Brooks.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I too can see benefits for people that want to avoid taking cars or that don't have access to cars. And I had a question that I guess for me, I'm not that familiar with scooters myself, but as far as being on one. So I'm curious, we have a lot of trees and debris that can come on the road. So I'm just wondering, like, how much, how, do they go over things that are in the road? If somebody, hits something in the road, not a log, but we have big branches that come down. And then back to some of what Councilor Pratt had said around not just staff, but operations of keeping lanes more clear, possibly, if there's less durability for riders than, say, a bicyclist. So I'm just curious about that. I have two questions. That's one.
Excellent question. So the scooters that we've designed have specifically been manufactured for a shared use application. That means they tend to be a little bit more robust than some of the consumer grade electric scooters that you might have seen in other locations as well. What that means is they'll have a larger wheelbase, so they can travel over debris with a little bit more confidence than something that would have a smaller one. They also have a front shock to help absorb some of that. As you, I apologize, getting over a cold here, so I'm losing my voice a little bit. So they do have a front shock as well, so they can get over some of the debris. Like you mentioned, a log is going to present a challenge just as it would to a bicyclist or even an automobile, realistically. Because they don't travel at an undue rate of speed, it does give people an opportunity to be able to navigate around things when the environment is safe as well. So certainly, given the existing bike lane network, I think that you'll find that most riders find the environment to be satisfactory or comfortable for them without having to change anything up operationally from a Twilton standpoint.
Well, I mean, I have residents talking currently about keeping debris because we have a lot of branches and things that come down. And so I just want to say that that's a factor that's not going to be the same as like a downtown Portland or something like that. And then I guess my other question is around safety, like injury, because we have such incredibly dense traffic on some of our roadways. When I'm sure that some people fall and have fallen, they're wearing a helmet. So I don't know how far my biggest concern is falling into traffic or traffic moving into them. And I hear the visibility pieces. Unfortunately, we've had, there's people that just drive into Taco Bell and or they're on their phone or whatever. So that's the other piece for me. Like if you were to kind of lose your balance and fall, how many feet do you traditionally fall? And, I would hate to see any like terribly serious injury. So I just would like you to speak to that. Thanks.
Absolutely. Councilmember Brooks, safety is our paramount concern as well for all of our riders. We do want to make sure we create an environment that is as safe as possible. So the city of Portland actually did an independent study, as did the city of Miami and the city of Austin. So did the International Transport Forum, which is a collection of transit agencies from 60 different member countries. Every single one of those studies found parity in the incident rate for injuries on e-scooters as the incident rate for injuries on bicycles, meaning e-scooters are going to be about as safe as bicycles. Further, in 2020, the ITF, the International Transport Forum, actually went further and recommended that cities explore e-scooters as a potential alternative transportation option, given the benefits that they deliver. So something that I think speaks to the fact that these really are showing true benefit to communities while not presenting an undue risk. When you combine those safety statistics, which encompass consumer electronic scooters as well, with some of the technology that we have around geo speed controls and the dynamic way that we can adjust those, I think we can create an environment within Twilton that we don't put anyone at risk, whether they are a rider, a resident, or an automobile driver.
Okay.
Do that to the best of our ability, obviously.
Okay. And if someone falls off, do they fall? Like, how far do they fall?
So they are lower down than a bicycle. I apologize. I think that would depend on a number of different factors, like the speed that you were traveling at, the position that you were standing in, those sorts of things. I don't know that I have any safety statistics I would immediately be able to say. The elevation of the scooter itself is quite low, and you are standing on 2 feet within that, which does give a little bit of ability for the individual to catch themselves and take a few steps to regain their balance if they do run into some debris or something along those lines. Certainly, I think there's quite a bit of freedom just given the shape of the scooter to accommodate something like that, what you've described.
Okay, thank you. I'm interested in seeing Nick and Mayor Bubenik give us a demonstration on these.
Happy to.
Sit as well.
Council President Grimes.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. Like Councilor Pratt, I work in Portland, so I've had quite a bit of experience moving in amongst the scooters there, and also, unfortunately, sort of the less popular side of the e-scooters with the abandonment and the destruction and the destruction of the actual scooter itself, and some of the other like more high maintenance, less great parts about having the scooters running around, which will bring me to my other point of city staff and what we would need on that end. But I did have quite a few questions, if it's all right, Michael.
Right.
My first question is about age. What age range do you allow to rent the scooters?
We require that our users be 18 years old and above, so legal age of majority and above. There are a number of ways that we can help control for that, including a credit card check when they create their account. We also have the capacity to do a driver's license verification or a state ID verification. What I would suggest is you might not necessarily want to implement that at the onset, simply because it tends to discriminate against certain populations that might not have access to a driver's license for whatever reason. And if this is meant to be an accessible public transportation option, see if it's an issue first before we implement some of those. But as I mentioned, that's where our relationship manager comes in. Certainly we can turn that feature and functionality on if we need to.
Okay, and since, would there ever be an option to offer helmets at the point of rental, or is that always going to be a voluntary thing that the rider would need to supply?
Very good question. We do a number of different campaigns with respect to helmets and have certain technology that we've been fielding in terms of being able to offer it in different circumstances. What we can do is certainly engage in a community safety event where we simply give out free helmets to anybody who's within the area, run a little demonstration in terms of safe riding behavior, et cetera, in combination with the helmet campaign that we do through our mobile application or our website. At the actual point of rental, there are some challenges simply because if you clip a helmet onto the handlebars, it has a tendency to get up and walk away, as I'm sure you can appreciate. But as I mentioned, there is quite a bit of technology that we're working on I don't have an immediate answer for you there. And unfortunately, now that we are a publicly traded company, I have to be a little bit more cautious in terms of what I can and can't say. But stay tuned.
Okay, because I do like the idea of the, if the connectivity portion, if the data carries that through, I could see that being an interesting idea. It's just that the vast majority of the bicyclists that I see that do, a significant amount of bicycling in the city, because we do have a lot of traffic and we do have some big intersections with long lights, they have their helmets on. They're very smart, responsible riders. And so having, people on a scooter that they might not be as familiar with the mechanics of it and then add no helmet, I have to admit that makes me a little scared, especially if I think of them coming from like the Max and going up to some of the park and rides. They have to, at the very least, go through at least one pretty big, long intersection, which actually, I had another question. The way that the fee for the ride is computed, you said it was so many cents or $1 per minute. Is that of actual ride time or is that of waiting time? So if someone had to wait, say, I don't know, 8 minutes or something to get through an intersection in a busy part of the day, are they charged for those 8 minutes or is that just riding minutes that you'd be charged for?
Good question. So it's actually $1 to unlock plus usually between 39 and 42 cents per minute. It is for the number of minutes that the scooter is unlocked, meaning from the time somebody unlocks it. So that wait time would count towards it. The reason being is if not, somebody could very easily scan a scooter, walk away, and then take it offline from the system for the entire day and not deliver any benefit to the community that way.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And just from, my anecdotal experience of seeing them around the city, it seems like there would be quite a bit of needing to spot them, have them picked up, possibly they could be in a bike lane. I think sometimes other people, not the riders, pick them up and mess around with them and they end up in some really bizarre spots. I've seen one in a tree. So, I know we're probably going to have city staff involved one way or the other, either cleaning up a route or, helping to keep an eye on these. And so I'm thinking that we would definitely need to have some sort of a, monetary compensation for that. But then that kind of scares me because then I think, what sort of liability would the city have in partnering with you guys for something like this? That makes me pretty nervous.
Well, I do have some good news for you in both respects. With respect to the experiences that you've had in Portland, Portland being one of the first cities that adopted shared scooters as a potential transportation modality. Unfortunately, I think the industry was still quite a bit in its infancy at that point, so we didn't necessarily have the same experience. For Twilton specifically, we are talking about a fraction of the number of scooters that you might see there. And at this point in time, a single provider, not that we are requesting any exclusivity here, but a single provider, which means a little bit more ease in terms of the day-to-day operations. In comparison to the 10,000 scooters that you might see in Portland, you would have 1% of that, maybe 100 scooters, of which 70% are active at any given time within Twilton to hit that necessary density of being a reliable public transportation option. What that means is that with our locally based fleet manager, somebody can check on every single scooter within Twilton multiple times per day. So once every few hours. So we can move them out there. We do not want to put a strain on city resources. So we can move them out of locations where they might present a nuisance. You're right, there are the occasional bad actors that can do something silly with one of these scooters, but you're talking about such a small number of scooters and the fact that somebody's checking in on them so frequently, it reduces that risk quite a bit. Moreover, it's the scooters that tend to remain stagnant for an extended period of time that are at the most risk because of the small fleet size that we're talking about here. It means that people can move them around very routinely and thus, again, reduce the chance of anything like that happening. To answer your question around risk and liability, I did provide some operating documentation to the city for their review with our city staff for their review. Within it, we do include some indemnification language for the city to help provide a layer of protection there. Further, we would add the city as an additional insured on our general liability policy so that even in the event there is a claim, it's going to be our policy that triggers regardless. Finally, all of our riders are required to agree to a terms and conditions page that includes a release for the city, or sorry, for the municipality to the extent that's applicable by state law. So at least 3 layers of protection in that respect. To be clear, this is not a legal partnership. When I talk about our city partners, I mean that in the colloquial sense for any of the lawyers that might be present on the call here today.
Okay, and if you'll indulge me, I have just one more question about the geofencing. I think is a very interesting idea, but I'm wondering with what precision can you execute that? So if we want to allow, you know, certain bike areas that are in and around some of the parks, but we don't want it around the commons or maybe the Riverwalk or something like that. I mean, I've worked with geofencing before for digital things, but not necessarily for something like this. And I'm just wondering, how precise can you be? And does breaking the geofencing or entering a geofenced area, does that mean that the scooter ceases to function? Is that how that works?
Good question. So what will happen if somebody crosses the operational zone is a scooter will slow down to about 1.5 miles per hour. It'll start beeping and flashing, and they'll receive a notification on their phone telling them that they must return to the operational zone. They will also not be able to end their ride, meaning they'll continue to incur a charge until they do so. So it's a way to incentivize people to bring it back. With respect to the accuracy, we do have quite a bit of technology in that respect that we've continued to work on and develop. Within some make models of our scooters, we can do some pretty phenomenal things. So that I don't make promises that I cannot deliver on, I'll say that you'll face the same kind of challenges that you would face with traditional GPS, typically about 6 feet of variability. So we can certainly block off certain areas within parks or the Riverwalk itself, but the system would not be accurate enough under certain circumstances to be able to differentiate between a bike lane and a sidewalk.
Okay, well, yeah, I do. I appreciate that very much. And I thank you for all your answers for us tonight.
A pleasure.
Councilor Hillier.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And most of my questions have been answered, but I do wonder about what is the, what do we do for folks whose barrier might be that they don't have a smartphone? And I wonder what languages things are presented in.
Excellent question. So we have the app available with dozens of languages. We also have a partnership with a real-time text translation service. So even if you don't happen to speak one of those languages and want to communicate with our customer support team, I think it's available in well over 100 at this point. So you'll be able to actually get in touch with us and have that direct real-time text translation. For those who are unable to access a smartphone for whatever reason, we also offer text to unlock. So it's very easy to register for that. And we can work with the city to release all this information and maybe a press release if you'd be interested, so that this information is very easily accessible by residents. That does segue very nicely to our community pricing program as well. So we offer probably the most robust community pricing program within the entire industry. It's 50% off all rides for those who qualify due to socioeconomic challenges. For veterans, for senior citizens, and for members of select nonprofit groups within a particular municipality. So we can make this a very affordable option across a very broad range of the population.
Thank you.
My pleasure, Councilmember.
President Grimes.
Thank you. Well, that's a great question, Michael, that you bring up, but how do you make that assessment of potential riders that they could be, there could be options for them to have a discount, especially if we're not asking about driver's license numbers and if we're making arrangements for people that might not have a credit card? How then would we?
Very, very good question.
Information.
I think one of the best ways we could do that is through a joint press release where we can put this information out to as many people as possible. It's also available through our website. So any individual that sees the bird branding, one of the stickers, which includes a URL for our website, will also have access to see how, if and how they can qualify for these various programs. It's quite easy to register. Typically it just involves sending an email and then a photocopy of a particular document, depending on what you are applying for. Or a scan, I guess I should say, rather than a photocopy.
Councilor Pratt.
I'm wondering if we were to move forward with this pilot program, do you have on your app when like satisfaction surveys for users, so there'd be some data for us to see how the program's going?
We absolutely have a survey at the end of rides that is optional if users want to fill it out. Moreover, we can work with the city to actually implement a broader survey that asks a little bit more nuanced or more specific questions and share that data with you at the end of the year if you'd be interested. We're pretty nice people.
Councilor Brooks.
I just want to say too, as far as with reaching out with the availability with the computers, that working with the library as well as press release would probably be really good, and making sure the librarians know about it and how to help people get on there.
I think that's an excellent idea. With the assistance of the relationship manager, we can help put together a campaign in that respect and make sure that we have all of the instructions very easily put together that we can disseminate within the library system.
Other questions?
I have one more, like as far as the last mile, etc. Like I think about people maybe going to the Juanita Pole Center and there's not a bike path all the way to the end of the ride. And so is there certain points where you're sharing parking lots or sharing roads? We also have gaps in our bike connection systems that we would love to have not gaps, but they are right now. And so do they share the road at certain times and they can do that?
Absolutely. Same way that a bicycle would share the road or under certain circumstances, take the right side of the road as applicable, same kind of thing with the scooters. In terms of parking, what we would advocate for is to park them in what you call the furniture zone. So that area between the curb and the sidewalk, wherever it's available. So where you might find, for example, a row of planters or a street light.
Okay, like a median. Okay, thank you.
We're running out of time. Councilor Hillier.
All right, one last question. I just wondered if you had any data on police interaction with these folks who might not be following the law or something, or need to be talked to about safety, and how this will affect our police department.
Very good question. I think that depends on the municipality. In general, I don't think it dramatically impacts any kind of crime statistics, simply because if a scooter is vandalized, it's not something that we report to police unless we can very definitively prove who it was. Unlikely to be the case realistically. We do have excellent interactions with the police departments that we're working within many of the communities that we serve. Certainly, I don't have any concerns in terms of Twilton being negatively impacted in that respect.
I didn't think there'd be a speeding ticket or anything, but you know, I was more concerned about people who don't stop at stop signs, that sort of thing.
I think that will ultimately depend on the enforcement that your police officers and that your code enforcement individuals would like to engage in. Similar to if they see an individual on a bicycle doing that, whether it's more appropriate for them to give them a warning or a ticket would be at the discretion of the officer.
Any other questions? So I just have one, and it deals with the fleet manager that you alluded to, that, you know, the person or persons aren't going to be 24/7. So is this a one-person operation, or is this fleet manager have some employees? Because I'm thinking weekends, holidays, where you might get a lot of these e-scooters collected on one corner. And as you're saying, we don't want them sitting there for, you know, the whole weekend. So how does that work with your fleet managers? Is it 7 days a week coverage? And, you know, you mentioned 9 to 5, 9 to 9. What were your hours again?
Excellent question. So typically I would say you're looking at maybe between 6 or 7 a.m. to about 9 p.m. Forgive me, it was a turn of phrase saying 24/7. What I meant to say is not a 24-hour operation, 7 days a week. Yes, absolutely. For Twilton, you're looking at least 2 fleet managers, meaning that there will be coverage in the event that somebody is ill. Most of our fleet managers do have employees. There's a few that operate as a solo enterprise, but that tends to be less likely these days.
All right. And you said their reaction time usually is within a few hours. I'm just envisioning, say there's some event and a bunch of the scooters collect on one corner, and that the fleet manager is alerted that, hey, there's a whole, you know, maybe 5, 6, 7 of these things sitting in a clump like I see in downtown Portland. And how do you manage that?
During special events, there are different operational parameters. When I say a few hours, I'm referring more to kind of the typical day that you might experience. With special events, you can work with the fleet manager, or city staff rather, I should say, can work with the fleet manager to designate particular parking zones, anything along those lines, so that everything is done in a very efficient fashion. And our fleet managers will be informed that they should be prioritizing collections within this particular area.
All right. And with this, the big critique, for those of us who do work in downtown Portland, is how they cluster up on the sidewalk versus the right of way, and block elderly and block people with disabilities. So I'm hoping that we can solve that issue here. It's gone down quite a bit in Portland, I think, like you're saying, over time in rider education. But we have a very active senior community here, and I do not look forward to hearing from them about e-scooters blocking their walkways.
Accessibility is something that's incredibly important to us as well. One of the best ways that we can help prevent that, well, I shouldn't say prevent, but help prevent the majority of those instances occurring, is doing exactly what I mentioned. Start with a very small fleet. If we're talking about 100 to 150 scooters, that is, from our perspective, incredibly small, and allows us to not really have that level of density where they present that clutter and that nuisance that you noticed in Portland maybe 2 years ago, or when things were a little bit newer.
Mhm.
Certainly, given the experiences we've had from the past, and given the operational parameters that our fleet managers have, I think we can make sure that the vast majority of those instances do not occur, and can proactively, I think.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
Thank
Okay,
you, Mr.
with that, what do you need from us, Sherilyn? Just, I know we're not voting on this, but basically the request is to have an ordinance for a pilot project, and that bring that back up here next couple of meetings or so.
Yeah, direction to for us to pursue a pilot program with Bird or not would be the.
All right. Councilperson Grimes.
Thank you. I think it's an interesting idea, and I think a lot of the information tonight was really helpful and very eye-opening. And thank you, Michael, for being so prepared for everyone's questions. Is there a way that we could, before we jump right to an ordinance for a pilot program, somehow maybe do a little bit of community outreach, even if it's just maybe to like the business CIO or a couple of the CIOs? Because I'm just sort of curious to get a little bit more feedback on how the community might feel about this and the residents might feel about this, if before it sort of just appears. And I'm not sure, I could be completely off base here. I'm just wondering if anybody else might feel that same way. Because I mean, I have what I think based on my experiences and what we've learned through the process, but I would be really curious to get a little bit more feedback, even from people who think they might use this for actual transportation, as opposed to, enjoyable, vacation style, fun travel around the city. I just feel like I wish I had a little bit more feedback from people.
I don't know whose hand up went first, but I'll go Councilor Brooks, then Councilor Pratt.
I think it's an interesting point. My only thing, Councilor Grimes, with that is when I heard them talking about the pilot program, it sounded like they do an educational piece with the community. And I'm wondering if we get feedback during that time and if that's integrated into the pilot program. So I don't know why our city would duplicate that work and spend time and money doing that if that's enfolded into the pilot program. That's my only feedback I've got. But I want to make sure that the community is really educated and engaged in the onset as well. So I appreciate your comment.
Councilor Pratt.
And that was my point too, I guess, is that I heard that there would be a lot of education, and that, I mean, a pilot program is just what that is, right? We're going to try this out and get a lot of feedback and see if we want to continue it long term. So I think that's our way of, finding out if this will work in our community.
All right. So is there a majority to give direction to draft that ordinance? Show of hands. All right, we've got the majority. All right,
Thank you all. Good to see you.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the direction, and we'll work with Michael and bring something back when it's ready.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks
members.
for spending your evening with us, Michael.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Take care.
All right. All right, moving on to our next item for tonight. That is the Basalt Creek Parks and Recreation Draft Plan. I see Rich and there's Ross. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councilors. Happy to be here tonight to talk about the planning work we have undertaken in the past 6 to 9 months, and really what that work entailed and what it didn't. So we're going to talk about that tonight. Rich Mueller, Parks Planning and Development Manager, was the project manager for this plan on the city's end. We also have a team from MIG. And so we have Rachel Edmunds, Bryce Merriman, and Cindy Mendoza representing MIG. And we'll walk through really what a planning effort in Basalt Creek is really thinking about providing a vision for the future and current residents and businesses of the Basalt Creek area. And thinking about and asking ourselves questions like, how do we create interesting, compelling future park spaces and gathering spaces within the Basalt Creek area? How do we ensure that people have access to natural areas and open space within the Basalt Creek area? How do we create places and spaces for community wellness to happen? And how do we connect people within the Basalt Creek area, within Basalt Creek, and also outside of Basalt Creek? And so we're going to turn it over to MIG, our consultant team for this plan, and Rich Mueller, and we'll walk through the process that we used and the information, some of the concerns we heard from community, and some of the benefits and vision for what we think is really an interesting, compelling vision for the future in Basalt Creek. So I'll turn it over to Rachel. Thanks.
Hey, good evening. It's great to be on the agenda for the first working session of council in 2022 and to present the Basalt Creek Parks and Recreation Plan. As Ross noted, this plan is going to make it possible for the city to pursue, consider, and plan for future opportunities as it relates to extending Twilton's park system to Basalt Creek in coming years. My name is Rachel Edmunds. I'm the project manager for MIG. Fun fact, which I like to share when I interact with groups about this project, is that I actually grew up in the Basalt Creek area until I was 10 years old. I lived along Grams Ferry Road. So working on this project has been like a once in a lifetime opportunity and experience that not too many landscape architects get the pleasure of doing. With me is Bryce Merriman, landscape architect and principal at MIG. Bryce and I want to make sure to thank the city side of what we like to call the TBC project team. And that includes Rich Mueller, Ross Hoover, Kyla Seska, and as well as other city staff that periodically stepped in to consult with us. And we're also grateful to the community that consistently showed up to be involved. And that's a pretty remarkable outcome given the backdrop of the pandemic. So thank you. So as you are aware, the Basalt Creek planning area is on the south side of the city, with adjacencies to both Wilsonville further south and Sherwood to the west, I-5 to the east. Basalt Creek is shown here, and it kind of roughly bisects the planning area. Basalt Creek includes 367 acres, and in the future that will add 7% of land to the city's existing acreage. Planning performed in 2018 identified 1,900 new employees will be working here, and the addition of approximately 575 new households. This part of Washington County has not been part of any city before, and that's important to really understand and grasp from the outset. Oops, sorry guys. parks and recreation facilities, and it goes without saying, most other kinds of facilities and infrastructure are absent here, and it's always been like that. With the Basalt Creek Parks and Recreation Plan, there's a major opportunity to bring existing and future residents and employees into the fold of Tualatin with a proposed extension of new infrastructure and facilities. This park plan builds from previous planning efforts, both the 2018 Parks and Recreation System Plan and the Basalt Creek Comprehensive Plan. And taking what was laid out in those efforts one step further, this plan articulates with more detail the long-term vision and intention as it relates to parks, recreation, and trails development. This plan at its foundation reflects major findings of those prior efforts. One, that Basalt Creek is posed to be a major employment area for the city, as well as home for established and new residents. And two, to address unmet need in the area, it will be critical to connect each of those user groups to parks and recreation in meaningful ways. Previously outlined goals from this park system plan, as well as Council's 2021 vision and priorities, guided the development of the Basalt Creek Parks and Recreation Plan. For example, city's vision and priorities for 2021 strive to create an inclusive community, an environmentally active, sustainable, responsible, and forward-thinking community that values and protects its natural resources and habitats, a thriving and diversified economy that includes living wage jobs and sustained financial stability for the city as a whole. So here's an overview of the process undertaken in 2021 for the Basalt Creek Parks and Recreation Plan. And in all, the project duration lasted about 10 months, with community engagement taking place along the way. The process was sequential, with each task informing the next, intended to provide the city with the most updated and best information that it needs to bring parks and recreation to this newest part of the city in coming years and decades. At multiple occasions, the community was given an opportunity to provide feedback before and during the development of the draft plan. This feedback I personally used to refine both the narrative and the graphics being presented tonight. At regular touch points, the project team interfaced with the community using a variety of tools, meeting types, and social media listed here. Thousands of notifications were distributed through the city's social media channels, community newsletters, and the city's webpage. In all, about 700 people engaged with this project, some multiple times over. There were 3 online survey opportunities designed to collect feedback about the overall project, opportunity areas and park programming ideas, and the draft plan itself. The public and the Spanish-speaking community specifically was engaged at the in-person Viva Tualatin event in late August held at Tualatin Community Park. Outreach to the Spanish-speaking community was a critical piece of engagement, and it was a priority for the city. All the engagement materials were provided in both Spanish and English formats, and a full Spanish translation of our 7-page executive summary in the plan was made the information both accessible and welcoming to the largest community possible. So the plan document that you reviewed for tonight's work session includes the following chapters. They closely reflect the project tasks undertaken by the project team. There were also virtual download links provided for 2 important plan appendices with all the needy details and documentation as it relates to community engagement and the cost estimate for the project. The site analysis marries the things we knew about the community and stakeholder needs and desires with the physical places and locations within Basalt Creek that could support those facilities, activities, and programs. This step helped the project team to better understand the physical site characteristics of Basalt Creek and its inherent opportunities and constraints. And this especially as it relates to planned land uses and natural areas on site. Protection of natural areas identified in Metro's Title 13 lands were considered, as was site topography, which is a main consideration for building parks that are both accessible and that include features desired by the community. A market study performed by Johnson Economics gave the project team insight towards prevailing prices of land, supply and demand conditions, and areas of Basalt Creek that are especially valuable and non-valuable for future manufacturing. Over the plan's development, we heard there were some concerns. And we want to bring those to the attention of council, as they will likely be topics that reemerge as the planning process continues. We heard the following. There's a concern about new sources of traffic in the area. There's a concern about the health and stewardship of natural areas in Basalt Creek. There's a concern about the timing and sequencing of stormwater planning and how that relates to longer term planning for parks. There's a strong desire for a large sports complex. There is a concern about looming plans for a Washington County bridge as it relates to the Basalt Creek Parkway extension. And there's concern from neighbors about what land acquisition looks like here. We want to assure and reassure the community that park land acquisition will happen with a willing seller. And so at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Ross and Hoover and planning staff in attendance so they can comment on some of these community concerns.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, so we were through many conversations with community members. I think we got a pretty broad understanding of what people are concerned about. Some that you see on the slide here, and things that people are hopeful about parks and natural areas and trails in Basalt Creek. So we want to take a minute just to drill down on some of these bullet points. And so Steve Coper is here from planning, Rich Mueller, park planning and development manager, and then Sean Brady, our city attorney as well. So we can answer some of these questions and get clarity. So first, traffic. We heard that people are concerned about traffic and what we're doing in terms of parks to help mitigate any impacts to traffic in the area. And so at this stage in the process, we do not have a specific site or sites selected. And furthermore, we do not have a design or a concept for what a specific site is going to look like. And so really this traffic impact question is a valid question, but one that's answered at the time of design and development and not at this stage, at this high level planning document stage. And then in terms of the Title 13 lands, Steve Coper's here. We wanted to just talk a little bit about the process of how the city goes through this process. And so Steve Coper, if you wouldn't mind talking just a little bit about this second bullet from a planning perspective.
Sure, thanks, Ross. Steve Cooper, Assistant Community Development Director. Thanks for your time this evening, Council. So just in regards quickly to the Metro Title 13, we'll also encompass the Metro Title 13 and then natural areas questions that have been raised. It's in some senses, it's similar to Ross's previous comments about traffic, which is to say that any potential impacts to future park or trail improvements would be assessed relative to those criteria at the time of a specific development plan. And then just from a generalized perspective, in the future, as part of the adoption process, which I think Ross and Rich are going to get to a little later in this presentation, city staff would develop findings that would demonstrate how the specific master plan at this high level stage complies and will comply through those mechanisms like development review in the future. And so I think from that perspective, we're obviously a little bit early in the process at this point where the park staff is looking for council feedback on the direction of this addendum to the 2018 Parks Master Plan. But I think that rest assured that these topics, the other ones as well, are on our radar and will be included as part of the final planning process that happens prior to adoption. And then again, at time of development of any particular amenities or actual facilities.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
The next bullet, the stormwater planning bullet, just really quickly, question about sequence, I think is really at the heart of this. And so stormwater planning work, which is we are in the midst of, and more work coming up. How does this parks plan fit with the stormwater plan? And we absolutely intend to. This document and the stormwater plan, like any other planning work, needs to be sequenced correctly. And so we heard that. And so we wanted to just address that and make it clear that the intent is that this does sync with the stormwater planning. And so we can talk more about that if you have any questions. We did hear that pretty loudly through survey tools primarily, that we need a giant sports complex in Basalt Creek, and how are we answering the need for athletic fields in Tualatin in Basalt Creek? And so the Basalt Creek area is not going to be the answer for all of our athletic field needs. However, I think it will, and Rachel will talk about this, it will play a role in Basalt Creek, and we will be able to, in part, answer some of those questions in Basalt Creek. But we have a more holistic approach throughout the whole entire city of answering our athletic field needs through partnerships with the school district, through adding more capacity to our existing fields that we already own. The next bullet is the bridge question, a bridge concern. So we did hear concerns about the Basalt Creek Parkway extension and bridge, and questions. I think the questions we've heard at council in the past, but one in particular was about what is the role of the bridge in the park system? And certainly the bridge will likely play a role in connections across the Basalt Creek Canyon. And so we have and will continue to communicate and work with Washington County staff to ensure that happens. And then the last bullet on this page, land acquisition. There were concerns about the city using eminent domain or taking of private landowners' land for future parks. And we indicated as staff that to our best knowledge and our history and our research, the city has not acquired parkland through eminent domain. And we intend to, through this process, it is our full intent to have a willing seller, willing buyer relationship with anyone who's interested in their property in Basalt Creek becoming future parkland. And so, so really this is, these concerns we wanted to make aware of these to everyone and answer initially at least some of the questions that were around them, and really that this is answering these concerns and answering the other questions through this planning work really helps guide staff in our community in that future vision for Basalt Creek. So I'll turn it back over to Rachel, and thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Ross. So the overall framework for long-term parks and recreation development is reflected in this diagram. Shown are 3 overlapping opportunity areas: west, central, and east. These areas today have distinct site characteristics, which in the future will be further distinguished by added manufacturing and higher density residential uses. The west side, shown in orange, is generally envisioned as a place for connections for employees, giving them places to walk and bike before, during, and after work hours. Its design will address safety, connectivity, and visibility, giving the manufacturing activities within. And this opportunity area also provides access to a major planned regional trail, the Tonkin Ice Age Trail. The east side, shown in pink or mauve, depending on your opinion, is characterized by residential uses at various densities. You know, more families will be living here in the future. And the Parks Division for the East Side is supported by a series of future homeowners association parks for use by their residents. Stormwater areas in these future developments will include passive features to expand the range of recreation. The central opportunity area shown in green will be the location to support a future new neighborhood style park built to serve nearby residents and employees. The plan proposes a future site somewhere along the east side of Gramps Ferry Road, where site conditions and adjacencies are less attractive for industrial investment and development. The Trails concept plan shows how to sew those three opportunity areas together and connect Basalt Creek. Not necessarily all segments shown here are going to come to fruition. What is shown really reflects the city's long-term vision to provide both east-west and north-south connectivity through the planning area, helping people living and working in Twilton to reach their park system. An off-street trail running north-south along the top of the canyon's west side, kind of shown here, is envisioned to provide the community with some visual access to Basalt Creek and its wetlands from above, while also making connections to neighboring communities like Wilsonville. The future neighborhood park is going to ideally connect to this trail once a site with a willing seller is identified. So this last slide here, provides a high-level overview of other details that will position the city to advance the Parks and Recreation for vision in Basalt Creek over a 15-year horizon. The plan and the cost estimate information in particular will position and help the city to strategically pursue grant and funding opportunities that will be needed for both land acquisition and site development. The action plan outlines short, medium, and long-term steps along the way and the parties that need to be involved in the process. So I'm going to kick it back to Ross to articulate some thoughts about council acceptance and later adoption of this plan. Thank you for your time, and Bryce and I look forward to questions and comments following those remarks.
Thank you, Rachel. And so we really wanted to come tonight at work session to answer any and all questions that you may have. And if we can't answer them tonight, we'll bring those answers back to you at a later date or correspond with you over email to get those answers to you. Really the intent, like I said tonight, was to get the information in your hands through the packet, through the plan itself, but also through the appendices, which includes a lot of detail, a lot of what we heard in response to the questions that we posed to our community. And with the intent to come back at a future time for a consideration of an acceptance action, which is essentially a resolution. It's not adoption, would be an acceptance action. And what that acceptance action would do is essentially provide for staff, give direction to staff on potential acquisition for future parkland in Basalt Creek area, and also set a path for that second bullet, which is consideration for adoption in the future. And so wanted to open it up now to questions and answers, and ask anything we can provide clarity on. We would like to do that.
All right, thanks, Ross. I'll wait for, can you pop back out of the PPT, the presentation? All right, so questions for the team. I'm just now I see Steve got a haircut. Whoa, okay. Questions for the team. Councilor Brooks.
Well, I just want to first say thank you to the team for their work. I've been part of the community engagement. The Twilton Arts Advisory Committee was part of the community engagement. I had neighbors stop me on my walk, and nobody sees me anymore since COVID. So and talk to me about the community engagement that they were part of and that they were really invested in. So I just want to, you know, I think time and time again, there is, as a behavioral health person, we look at patterns, and there's good patterns, and the level of community engagement, and also bringing up tough topics at the front end instead of waiting for us to ask those hard questions, just means a lot to me. So I just really appreciate the work of the consulting team, and it's interesting that you used to live here, and Rich and Ross in leading this. I know there's questions, and I guess some of my you covered it a little bit, but I think it's really important to be clear and clarify the purpose of the document around being around visioning, and can you tell me more exactly? So when we're going through to approve this for a different kind of approval, and then we're going to differentiate this from some of the concerns that I hear about master planning versus a visioning document versus, like, can you give me some clarification, someone?
Certainly. Thank you, Councilor Brooks. Yes, so the acceptance action is a similar action that we have used in the past as a city. And it was also the same two-step pathway that we used for the Parks and Recreation System Plan back in 2018-19. And so what it does do for staff is it allows for staff to begin to work along that pathway at the same time that it provides opportunity for continued feedback and conversation. So as we get, if this plan is something that you would like to take that action with, city staff can then think about, in this case, land acquisition, and city staff can continue to synchronize the timing of things like the stormwater plan in Basalt Creek, for example. And so it allows for those things to come together. And in the future, there would be an actual adoption action that would then bring this plan into city code in the comp plan. And that second action would be the official land use action. So, and Steve and Sean Brady, please feel free to correct me if I was incorrect on any of that.
Yeah, that's an accurate summary, and I would just reiterate Ross's comments that that was the same model that was successfully used in the Parks Master Plan adoption in 2018 and 19. And I think that there's also the added benefit of the fact that the adoption as a secondary action will also give space for additional public involvement and feedback on both the master plan itself and then those other criteria, which we saw as important to people in the feedback slide. And so I think that that's nice to have that extra room to be able to work through those issues, while at the same time, I think, as Ross pointed out, giving some certainty and clarity, particularly from this council who's worked so hard on both the master plan and then this follow-up to the master plan, so that there's certainty with direction of where they need to go next.
Thank you. And okay, that really helps me a lot. So I really appreciate the thoughtfulness in that, and the continued ability for people to engage on these really tricky issues. And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record a little bit, but when I look at these trails that go where this bridge is going to go with heavy truck traffic, and I think about the letter or the notification I saw from the county where they're not going to do sound mitigation because it's too expensive. I just am curious, you know, the impacts towards these paths and stuff are, I find it disappointing. Let's just put it that way. And so I don't even, I want to just say that on the upfront, and also just to say that that I'm aware that this area is tricky. It's tricky for developing a big sports field because of the topography there. It's tricky for, there's been problems in the past with stormwater management, so it's understandable that people are concerned and it's tricky. And I am invested in doing the best that we can do as a city to manage this better than how it was managed before it was coming in our direction. And I think having a plan and having the feedback is going to give us the best opportunity to do this while meeting the growth requirements that the county has asked us to take on. And finally, I just want to say that, you know, a lot of this area is workforce, which I think has a lot of traffic involved. I know that some of the visible areas are the housing. And I just want to say, with the housing crisis that we have, I appreciate that we are being mindful, and that you've been mindful around providing as much green space as breaks from development, access to clean air, and maintaining the natural, you know, area as well as we can, while providing housing, much needed housing in our area. So I appreciate all the community engagement and the engagement here, and know that there's a lot of issues right on the upfront, but I think that that's a really good place to start, because we can see when people are working in denial, how that is a big barrier to progress in the right way. So, so I appreciate you putting all these challenges on the front end, and I look forward to, you know, coming to the best solutions that we can, working together as a council with the city staff and these great consultants. That's all I've got. Thanks.
Councilor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ross and Rich and your team, for the community outreach. So good to hear that you were listening and addressing concerns on this. And I know this is at a very high level because we're, this is a master plan. But my question, when I look at this, there's just a center section here. It looks like, I'm trying to get my directions right. East of Grants Ferry, west of Basalt Creek, there's this kind of rectangle section that looks like the only area that would really be available for parks. Is that correct? And if so, how much approximate acres are in that section?
I can handle that question. Yeah, the GIS kind of data assessment we did, looking at a variety of criteria, identified that little kind of trapezoidal area as the most likely area to be able to provide parks. And it also addresses issues related to land pricing, that we know the land will not be priced as high in those areas because of different site constraints. So there's a lot of things that we were balancing. I think in that sense, the whole area is about 367 acres, and I would guess that, I haven't actually drawn a polygon and assessed that thing, but I would guess it's about 75 acres to 100 acres.
So there's probably like 5 sections you could choose from to get a 20
I think there's about 15 parcels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then my next part, and I know we're not here yet, but I have to say it, when we did the transportation system plan update, has to be at least 10 years ago, before Ross and Rich. We had representatives from TU Park on there, and there was talk about bumping Hull across the river, and that got stopped, mostly because there was a study that showed having that traffic right next to the park would cause a lot of noise pollution and a lot of air pollution, and it got stopped because of that, and that's what our residents wanted. So as you're looking at that, and I don't know at what point you do this, but I have a real concern that it's not next to where these trucks are going over that part, you know, bridge extension, and having the same effect on the park in this area, especially when we're serving a lot of residents. So that's all I have on that, my concern.
Yeah, some of the parcels are more desirable than others, given the proximity of that planned facility, for sure, for certain. That's,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, well, great, thank you.
Other questions?
Only, well, just to add on to that, only one or two of the parcels, and only one on the east of Graham's Ferry side is in the city of Twilton, because the parcel immediately below Basalt Creek Parkway is in Wilsonville.
All right. Other questions for the team? All right, because to be honest, I'm still reading through the report. It's quite a lengthy one, and there's a lot in it. And I knew tonight was just an informational presentation, decision point. So I encourage folks to continue reading it. It's not a short report, but there's a lot of good stuff in here that takes some time to review, and I didn't want to rush it over the weekend. So I'm going to continue to read it. And as Steve said before, we'll be bringing this back later, as Steve and Ross, you know, for consideration. So the community still has extra time to provide feedback and comment to City Council until we get to that point. And as you're going through the report, if you have any questions for the team, feel free to email them and then share the answers with all of us. Anything else? All right, so I guess we're done with this subject. All right.
Well, just to be clear, and
Okay.
maybe you were, and I misheard, but so on the January 24th agenda, there will be this will be on the January 24th agenda for acceptance, and then sometime in the future it'll be on the agenda for adoption into our code.
Right, so we have a couple more weeks before we go through the acceptance process.
Correct.
So 2 more weeks for us to review the plan, get more questions answered. Folks who are in the community want to contact us about their concerns. Still have 2 more weeks before we're taking any formal action on this. Okay, thanks for asking for clarification. All right. All right, so next up, we're up to council communications roundtable. I believe since we got a new year, we'll start the Pledge of Allegiance rotation all over again, and that would be Councilor Reyes, but she's sick tonight, so we'll have Councilor Sacco will do the pledge. Sound good? I believe we don't have any proclamations. We do have a special announcement tonight, a sad one. And any questions on the consent agenda?
Mayor, there is a proclamation associated with that.
Oh, okay. But you know, okay, that's good. Consent agenda. Any questions? Any concerns? All right. All right, with that, I'll go ahead and start the roundtable here. We'll start off with Councilor Pratt.
Sorry, this thing pops up and it makes it hard to unmute. I only had one meeting, and Councilor Sacco was on that with me. It was the tolling diversion subcommittee. And is this the time I should bring up the resolution, or during council meeting?
Let's see if we can get how fast we get through this.
You want me to come back to it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's come
Because
back.
I want to get the roundtable done first, and then we have time. We can start talk about it then. If not,
Okay.
we can, you know, do it at the city council meeting.
Okay.
That was it.
I'm going to make one comment, and it was Councilor Sacco's question at that meeting. Is she asked if the mitigation costs would be borne by ODOT through the tolling, and they said yes, but it was caveated with as required. So that really made me question what that meant.
All right.
That is it for me.
All right. Councilor Sacco.
And besides the tolling meeting, I attended the C4 meeting last week and where we discussed transportation and really what we went over are the priorities that were discussed at the C4 retreat earlier, well, I guess later in the year of 2021. And our Councilor Pratt and my concerns that we brought up were listed on those priorities. So I felt good that we were represented. And that's about all we had time for at C4.
Right.
That's it.
All right. Councilor Hillier.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think Councilor Sacco and I also spent some great time with the Equity Committee and going over some of those things with staff, and we'll be excited to talk about that here with Council soon. And also last Friday, the 7th, I think it is, Officers Montrose and Grant reached out to me to see if we could meet and sit and kind of just chat. They're representatives of the Twilton Police Association. And I would just encourage, they're looking to just build relationship with us as a council. And so I kind of talk to them explain the rules the best I know it, that we can only be 3 of us at a time and that sort of thing. We'd probably prefer to meet virtually for safety reasons and those sorts of things. But I would encourage you to get to know them. They're great resources in our community, and I learned a lot from them about some of the things that are going on in our community, both that help me personally as a council person and also in the role that I play otherwise in our community. And so I would just encourage you to accept their invitation when they give it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Brooks.
Happy New Year, everybody. The only meeting I was at was the Twilton Arts Advisory Committee meeting, and we focused much on the traffic wraps and increasing the numbers of those in the city, and possibly just having our overall plan kind of for the year of other things that we might be engaged in. Those decisions haven't been made yet. So upcoming this week, however, the executive team for the Water Consortium will be meeting, and PAB, the Policy Advisory Board, will be meeting, and we will be going over applications coming up soon in the next month's time for grants. So it's going to be a busy time. And anyway, nice to see everybody. That's about it.
All right.
And I just want to say also, and I know we'll do this later, but I just want to say thank you to Sean. You know, we're talking about the concerns over in the Basalt Creek area. Sean took time to go over there, walk, help advise, has been so instrumental to me personally for helping me make what I feel are more sound decisions and understand a lot of the legalese and things around land use and things that I'd never considered before I become a counselor. So I know we're going to do this later, but I just want to take a moment to say thank you, because your face is up here, and I can't, and I'm sort of in shock that you're going. So that's it. Thanks.
Okay. Council President Grimes.
Happy New Year back, Bridget and everybody else. It's good to see you guys, even if it is virtually. I don't have any meetings since the last meeting for the holidays and such, but I did want to say I was so reassured when they were talking about the Basalt Creek plan tonight, and so many times they brought up community input and community wishes and community ideas and community goals and thoughts and input, and it just, God, it made me feel great. I just love how we, as a community, reach out to people and include them and listen. I just think that's fantastic. So I just wanted to share that because I felt really happy in my heart for that. And then, of course, Sean, oh my gosh, you've been such a huge part of my time on council. I can't imagine doing this and not having you there. So anyway, I know we're doing this later, but boy, oh boy, oh boy. I know Sherilyn's going to miss you, but so are we. And I know I will, super huge amounts. So, and I'm sorry we can't do like a council retreat planning thing with you before you leave, like a real live in-person one where we can have fun and do stuff. So anyways, appreciate you like crazy and wish you luck. So we'll celebrate you in a couple of minutes, but had to put that in there too.
All right. Just a few things for me tonight. I want to thank our Parks and Recs folks, especially Heidi and Julie, for the holiday lights parades. They were terrifically organized, well executed, even though they seemed to be a lot wetter than last year. It was the weather didn't cooperate this year, but we still did it. And we had that one night where it was kind of iffy with the wind, but it did die down. But I want to thank them for all the work they did on that. I heard from quite a few folks who really enjoyed it and look forward to it again next year. Today was the Washington County Coordinating Meeting. Big subject of the discussion, imagine that, is tolling, because at the metro level, JPAC and MPAC, they were supposed to vote on the amendments to the regional transportation plan. Deferred for a month at the request. Clackamas County has some issues with the program and wants to make sure their concerns are heard and acknowledged. You've all seen the letter that Clackamas County is going to be forwarding, signed by the Clackamas County mayors with their concerns on the tolling project as it is today. So Washington County Coordinating Committee also has the same concerns. We discussed it. ODOT was there at the meeting, as they usually are. So I look forward to see what's going to happen at JPAC and MPAC over next month, where a lot of the community, a lot of the jurisdictions, electeds like Clackamas County are going to be giving lots of feedback to ODOT and to Oregon Transportation Committee, how they feel about the present state of tolling. We also discussed, you'll recall that we are going through a new round of MSTIP, that's the county transportation funding mechanism for a lot of projects here throughout Washington County, and getting into how projects will be evaluated. So they had their first draft of evaluation metrics and the committee weighed in a little bit. We're going to get a little bit more detail, but some of the high-end metrics that they're going to use to rate projects for this next funding cycle. Of particular interest was the next item was the countywide transit study. Washington County is doing, as the title says, a countywide transportation study. What was cool about this is that we have skin in the game because Tiger, Tualatin, Hillsborough, and Beaverton are also helping pay for this to see what can be done in the county to expand transit service, accessibility, and speed up the speed of transit and its reliability. It'll be pretty much a year-long project. They gave the first presentation today. We'll be getting updates and it will come to city councils as milestones are hit on their study. One of the questions I brought up was, the weird predicament we're in, that we have Clackamas County and our lack of east-west mobility, and making sure that Washington County continues to work with Clackamas County on Borland Road and 205 and getting some mobility that way, because if we do have tolling, we're going to have transit options, and there are none at this time. And in speaking with ODOT, not ODOT, TriMet, as many of you know, TriMet is decreasing service right now because of lack of drivers, and they are reevaluating the whole service program here over the next few months. So I've got some concerns there. That's where it comes down to public transit. To get out to the community, they're going to be doing surveys, forums, and workshops. And one of the things we asked the county was not to Of course, you want to talk to people who are riding public transit right now, but somehow you got to get out to the people who are not riding public transit, find out why and what it will take to get them on public transit, because this feeds into our discussion earlier with the scooters, that most of the issues that we have in town here are folks who just want to go to Fred Meyer and back, and so they get in their car. That last mile connection, the folks who want to get from the West Station over to Lamb Research and happen to miss the right connection bus. So it's going to be super important that we look at all different kinds of transit modalities here in the next year. Later this afternoon, we had the Washington County chairs meeting with the mayors. I sent you a couple memos about the expansion of the shelter program they're doing, about relocating the Center for Addiction Triage and Treatment. They have 3 sites, one being the old WACA facility, which seems to be in the lead, and the other 2 being in Hillsborough, but those don't seem to be progressing that far or that well. Again, my continuing concern is it's still in Beaverton. It's still a haul for anybody in this area who wants to take, get some of the services from that addiction facility. So you're going to have to get on a TriMet bus or drive or something like that to go over to Beaverton. But I guess it's still better than Hillsborough. But I'd like to have something over in this side of the county that's easier, more easily accessible. And the last thing is, due to the Omicron surge, Hillsborough is rescinding the in-person State of the City. They're going to do it all virtual Zoom, Washington County TV, because they don't want to deal, with the surge. And as we were talking when we started today, about how many folks we know have now gotten this latest version of COVID, that it's just not worth it meeting in person. So, and it sounds like most of the cities continuing on are not going to have them in person, not for considerable next few months, because it's just not worth the risk. And that's all I have. So is there anything else? All right. So Charlene, for the proclamation, I don't see it in my packet. Do you have it for Sean? Because I pulled mine down yesterday. Was it updated?
Oh, it was updated today. It's on the agenda on the website. If you.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
All right. Is there someone who would like to read that proclamation, or do you want to read it, Sherilyn?
Oh, I think it's the council proclamation. I'll have some.